The philosophical side of love is an endless, vast territory of discussion where the where it's pretty easy to spend a lot of time, a lot of words, a lot of thoughts on love, what love is. It takes less words, far less words to describe what love does. And John, in 1 John 5, that's kind of where he's going. He says in verse 2, this is how we know that we love the children of God, by loving God and carrying out his commands. In other words, here is a principle. Do you want to love? The best way to demonstrate love for God's children is to, how does he say it? Love God, carry out his commands. Jesus said it this way: if you love me, you'll do what I say. If you love me, you will obey me. Comes down to that, doesn't it? And we talked last time about his prime directive as he was wrapping up his earthly ministry that last evening with his disciples around an early Passover meal, where he said, I am giving you a new command, that you love one another as I have loved you. This is big and small all at the same time. If you want to pull all of the other commands, all of the other commandments, all 10 of the big 10 are executed when we love one another the way Jesus loved us. When you set things up in the context of, all right, how did Jesus do it? As that being our ultimate model, this is what we judge our effectiveness, our sincerity, everything about what we do. We use Jesus as the standard. Oh, that's great. I'm toast. I am way so not like Jesus. My motives are impure. My understanding is incredibly limited. My endurance, my stamina, everything about my life is minus when compared with Jesus and his life. Yeah, Jesus had to rest. Jesus took naps. But, man, he kind of was an ever-ready bunny, and I'm not. I get easily fatigued these days. That's physically. Emotionally, I get easily fatigued. I'm easily discouraged. I I complain at the drop of a hat. So I could go on and on and on, and you probably see some of yourself in my complaints about myself. But my complaints about myself are not the point. The point is Jesus and his life, his example, his model, and me not making, it's not exclusively about me making more effort to be more like Jesus. Yeah, there's effort involved in it, but this is not merely an effortful thing. This is huge, and we have to understand that God is at work in us to fashion us, to shape us, to make us more like Jesus. This is what the Apostle Paul wrote in Romans 8:29. And in verse 8:28, it's a great, great promise, for we know that in all things God is at work for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. great promise to cling to. And then here is the why. For those he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the likeness of his Son. You need to get your Bible out and read it for yourself and let it soak in. Those he foreknew, he also predestined. He knew beforehand who would say yes, and he knew all of that. There's nothing he doesn't know. So everything that is yet in the future for us is in terms of now for him. And that's the deepest of metaphysical waters, in my opinion, but that's the truth. And for those he foreknew, he predestined them. So this is, in my opinion, this is the cornerstone predestination verse. That God's predetermined design for all of those that he knew ahead of time would say yes to Jesus. His predetermined outcome was that they would be conformed to the likeness or the image of his Son, that they would be fashioned, that all of these things that God makes work for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose would work toward fashioning, shaping, conforming us to the image of his Son. So whatever good happens in my life, God's intention is that it would draw me more deeply into the image of Jesus. Whatever bad happens to me, God's intention is that it would shape me to be more like Jesus. That's the point. So John writes, this is how we know that we love the children of God, by loving God and carrying out his commands. This is the outcome. We love God and we carry out his commands. Jeez, you can't, this is not isolated from what Jesus said. If you love me, you'll keep my commands. You'll obey me. Okay, now we're talking about the same thing here. We love God and we carry out his commands. What commands? Come back to it easy, and this is the last I'll say about it for a while. It's the prime directive, that we would love one another as Jesus loved us. And then he goes on in verse 2. In fact, this is love for God, to keep his commands. Oh, golly. Now we're down to that again, that it's just all about obedience. No. It's all about love that gets demonstrated in obedience. If I say I love God, but I don't do what he has told me to do, you could legitimately question the depth and extent of my love. If I say I love my wife, but I don't ever address her needs, I don't ever do what she asks me to do, I disregard her, you would have every reason to doubt that I really loved her. See, a similar kind of thing happens in this walk with God, as often happens with human romantic love. In human romantic love, often it comes down to, I love me and you make me feel good, so I think that means I love you. No, that's just a utilitarian, immature view that says, this is all about me. Don't we do that with God sometimes? I love God. Really, though, what it comes down to is I love me and I like what I can get from God. Well, that's just me. I don't know if it's you. In fact, this is love for God, to keep his commands. It seems so hard. Then John says, and his commands are not burdensome. See, that that kind of goes back to what Matthew records. One of the things that Jesus said is, "Come to me, you who are weary and burdened, and I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me. I'm meek and humble of heart." And then he says, the taking his yoke upon us is, he says, "For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." I think what he's talking about is that was earlier than when he said to his disciples, "This is the new command, that you love each other the way I love you." I think, though, that is the burden, that is the yoke. Our task is to love each other the way Jesus loved us. And John says his commands are not burdensome. They're not. Well, one of the things that makes a command burdensome for a lot of us, this would be true of me, is that they seem unreasonable. An unreasonable command, to me, seems burdensome. And what John says is, God's commands aren't unreasonable. They're not unfounded. They're not arbitrary. They're not capricious. They're reasonable. His commands are not burdensome. And then he goes on and says, "For everyone born of God overcomes the world." What? Now, how does that connect? I think it just connects like this. If you're born of God, then that requires that you have said yes to Jesus on his terms. And when you say yes to Jesus on his terms, you essentially are signing on to express your devotion and love for him through the behaviors of your life. And these behaviors are in obedience to his design, his command. And the truth is, when I obey his commands, when his design is my highest priority, I will not be in step with the world. I'm going to be out of step with what the world says, because the world, it has no significant regard for Jesus' commands. No, let me take that back. It occasionally does, whenever his commands happen to align with worldly desires, right? The accidental nature of occasional obedience, it's there. But man, you don't want, there's not a strong future in that. So, okay, we've got the concept is fairly concrete here. We love God. And because we accept his love for us, we come into this relationship with God through Jesus, and we express our love for him through our behaviors. And these behaviors center around God's commands. And when we obey God's commands in this way, nobody's perfect at it, but when it is our highest desire, our highest priority is to obey God's commands, it will put us out of step with the world. And then John says, but hey, everyone born of God overcomes the world. In other words, yeah, you're going to be out of step, but it's okay. When God's work in my life and my partnership with him, my cooperation with him, which equals my obedience to him, is my highest priority, I overcome the world. You see, when that priority overcomes all the priority that the world loads on me, that's where real life happens. We'll come back to that next time on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.